This is Chasing the Horizon, a podcast by, for, and about motorcyclists, brought to you by Dunlop Motorcycle Tires and the BMW Motorcycle Owners of America. Welcome to episode 33 of Chasing the Horizon, released on the 1st of October, 2018. I'm your host, Wes Fleming, and if you've ever wanted to ride in Cuba, you're about to find out how to make that happen. We're going to get right into it with some news from Royal Enfield. I've mentioned their new 650cc twins a couple of times, the Interceptor and the Continental GT, and now it's official. Both will be available in the USA starting in the spring of 2019. Cost of the bikes starts at $5,800 and includes anti-lock brakes, a 3-year warranty, and roadside assistance. In India, these bikes are selling for just over $4,000, making them the least expensive twins in that country. Rod Copes, who was my guest in episode 17 and is the CEO of Royal Enfield North America, called the twins a, quote, integral part of Royal Enfield's growth plan in the United States, Canada, and Mexico. He's also clearly excited about the opportunity for Royal Enfield to expand their presence in the middleweight segment with the first parallel twins produced by the company since 1970. Both bikes are air-cooled and were developed at the company's technology center in England, along with frame experts Harris Performance. Hit the show notes page on the website at chasingthehorizon.us to see some photos, but I can tell you the Interceptor 650 looks like a standard motorcycle with wire wheels and a nice, easy, upright sitting position. The Continental GT 650 has what they're calling a, quote, more committed riding position and features an overall racier look with a scooped seat, rear cowl, and low-slung handlebars. Sticking with news about the motorcycle industry in India, there's a big upheaval going on in Chennai, a city often referred to as the Detroit of South Asia. It's called that because a half dozen automakers have factories there, and obviously so do some motorcycle manufacturers, or I wouldn't be telling you about what's going on. Workers at a number of motorcycle companies, including Yamaha India and Eicher, are on strike, demanding higher pay and better benefits, the right to form unions, and that contract employee laws, and claiming that contract employee laws are being exploited to avoid bringing on permanent full-time workers. Eicher Motors owns Royal Enfield, by the way, and they made a statement saying they hope a mutually beneficial agreement is in the works. Talks don't seem to be progressing too well so far, but we'll see what happens. One of the things I find interesting in all of the articles that I read about this is that the source material that they've all used for the same incident is careful to mention that Eicher Motors is a competitor of Harley-Davidson. I guess that's one way to boost search engine hits. When it comes to new bikes headed for production, there's a lot to choose from. When Yamaha revealed its T7 concept bike at EICMA in 2016, eyes widened and pulses quickened among those of us with a weakness for adventure bikes. What Yamaha showed off then was more or less a rally race-ready 700cc motorcycle, and the clamor to put it into production instantly went up. Yamaha appears to have listened, and like the T7, the Tenere 700 World Raid is built around the same engine that powers the FZ07. Oh, Yamaha won't confirm they're putting the bike into production, but with Intermot kicking off next week, AIM Expo right after that, and EICMA not far in the future, I'm not going to be surprised to see video of the newest middleweight adventure bike sometime soon, and maybe even one in person here in a couple of weeks. The Tenere 700 looks to be heavily dirt-oriented, unlike its big brother, the Tenere 1200. I can't say I'm surprised to see this bike fueling production rumors, what with KTM's 790 Adventure R, BMW's F850 GS and 750 GS, and other middleweight adventure bikes on the horizon. A bike we can expect to see at Intermont is the new Suzuki Katana. For those of you who don't know, the Katana is a liter plus bike that drove Suzuki's sales back when lithe sport bikes were all the rage. The new Katana looks absolutely stunning with an LED headlight and an exhaust configuration that looks a lot like what's on the GSXS 1000. If that ends up being the case, you can expect natural aspiration and no turbocharger on the new Katana, which isn't such a bad thing. If you're looking for a turbocharged Suzuki, though, look for the XE7 from 2015 and see if Suzuki is going to put that beast in a frame and roll it down the highway. When it comes to other over-the-top motorcycles, almost nobody does it better than MV Agusta. They've partnered with tire maker Pirelli to come up with a crazy naked street fighter of a bike, and they're calling it the Dragster RR Pirelli Edition. The insanity starts with a custom seat and an exclusive ceramic-based paint for the exhaust. The bike is powered by an 800cc liquid-cooled triple, pushing 140 horsepower through the 6-speed transmission. Agusta hasn't said how many dragsters they'll be making, but it's likely to be a limited edition given the attention to detail apparent in the photos. If you're looking for a mad bike in your garage, you can get a dragster in a black and yellow color scheme or a cool-looking blue and white one that features white rims and blue spokes on the wheels. In every episode, I tell you about one of the benefits of being an MOA member. This time around, it's something called the Anonymous Book. The Anonymous Book is all about members helping members. For years, MOA members have used the Anonymous Book as a BMW rider's roadside assistance plan, and it still works today. A print version of the Anonymous Book is available with every membership. If you've recently joined the organization or recently renewed, your copy will come out automatically. Delivery usually takes about 6 weeks or so. A long-awaited digital Anonymous Book is also ready. It's the same information as the paper edition with a few improvements. Most notably, it's available on your desktop, tablet, or smartphone. You can search by city, state, or keyword. Inside the Anonymous Book is a listing of members by city and state who are willing to help other MOA members in time of need. Each listing contains the member's phone number and a list of services the MOA member is willing to provide. For more information, check out the webpage at bmwmoa.org/abook. You can also send an email to membership@bmwmoa.org or give us a call at 864-438-0962. By the way, if you're already an MOA member, it's the time of year when we need you to review your Anonymous Book data and update anything that needs updated. Before we get going with my discussion with Christopher Baker, I want to apologize for the noisy nature of what you're about to hear. This discussion, along with a number of other ones you're going to hear this season on Chasing the Horizon, was recorded at the MOA's big annual rally in Des Moines, Iowa last summer. I was set up on a stage in the middle of a convention center with spectators in attendance, so you may hear us refer to the audience a few times as well. Thanks for understanding, and here we go. Welcome to the discussion portion of this episode of Chasing the Horizon, which is going to come out sometime after the interview happens, but I'm here at the MOA rally in Des Moines, Idaho. Hello, everybody. With Christopher Baker. Is the P important?
Only for my byline, because there's another Christopher Baker who's a travel writer.
There you go. Christopher, sometimes Christopher P. Baker, travel writer, motojournalist, motorcycle rider, world traveler, all those kinds of things. Chris, welcome to the show.
Wes, it's a great pleasure to be here.
Thank you for joining me, and I appreciate you being at the rally and taking time out to come and do this.
I always love the MOA. Wouldn't miss it.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. But from what I understand from a lot of your recent riding, you're riding Indians a lot lately.
I am, yeah. I'm working closely with Indian at their invitation to test ride some bikes from the travel perspective. So recently ridden the Roadmaster in Scotland last year, South Africa 2 years ago on the early edition of the Roadmaster,
right.
Doing road tests, but mostly it's about the travel experience using an Indian.
So how is that different from doing, say, a performance test or a bike review, to approach it from the travel angle? What do you do different than you think those guys that are men and women that do the initial test and they're looking for performance characteristics?
Okay, well, firstly, I'm a technical idiot, and so I'm not big into the technicalities, and a lot of people are more versed and into that aspect. I'm a travel writer. That's what I've been doing full-time professionally for almost 4 decades. So I come at the experience from the enjoyment factor, the learning process of the destination and tether that to the enjoyment factor of the bike, plus some of its negatives and its positives that I can weave into the story, but a travel story and usually a destination profile.
Right. So you actually get a little more of a chance to really explore how the bike works in the real world.
Exactly.
As opposed to, this 200-mile blast on a weekend that the manufacturer gives you access to the bike or a press release or something like that.
That's exactly right. And one example that comes to mind is in Southern Africa, as I plotted out my route, there were 3 game reserves I was going to, and I contacted one game reserve and I said, can I bring a motorbike in there? Most of the reserves, they don't let bikes in because they got lions and other predators.
Sure. They don't want you chased down.
So she said, oh yeah, we have bikes all the time. So I arrived at the gate, which was a big Jurassic Park gate, wild animals, enter at your own risk and whatnot. Fine. I'd come along a gravel road. It's a do-it-yourself, open the gate and lock the gate behind you. And immediately this turned into a serious track, off-road track. I thought, oh shit, I'm on the Indian Roadmaster. I better not drop it on this track. And it really tested the bike to its utmost. And just as I got to the lodge, 2 rhino came out of the bush.
So what's that feel like to see rhino coming at you?
More. I was in Mozambique last year, not motorcycling. I actually had an elephant charge me. That gets the adrenaline going. I didn't know I could run so fast.
Well, clearly you survived that incident. So that's kind of your recent motorcycling, with traveling. How did you first get into riding motorcycles? Back when you were a kid, I'm guessing.
Well, as a kid, I rode Lambrettas. I grew up in a coal mining area in northern England. I was in the mod scooter gang. We all had Lambrettas. Nobody had Vespas in my gang. But after I came to the States in '80, I was not a motorcyclist. Kind of left it behind me. But I became a travel writer. And then when, in the early 90s, when I got involved in Cuba, and we can talk about how that happened, I decided I was ready to do a book about Cuba, a literary travel log. I'd been commissioned to do to author a guidebook, so I needed to be there for a long time, researching the entire country. And I also wanted to do this literary book. And so I decided I would buy a motorcycle, ship it to Cuba, and use that as the vehicle for researching geographically, but also the vehicle of the book. Right? Moving the book forward, to have a focus point for the book. And that got me back into motorcycling. So that happened. We can talk about that journey in a while. And then again, after that trip, I left motorcycling behind me. The bike would sit in the garage and the battery would die, and then once a year I'd try and revive it. And then in 2011, tours to Cuba were legalized by Obama for group programs.
Right.
And I began to put Cuba-related group motorcycle tours together. Hence, I started coming to MOA, Horizons Unlimited, other venues like that, and discovered the motorcycling community. That's the key.
Once we get you in, you can't get back out.
It's the motorcycling community that you relate to.
Yeah.
And that really got me more seriously into motorcycling per se as something that I was enjoying and a focus for my writing also.
So did you find that you're, like, I realize we're supposed to be talking about motorcycles, but I'm also kind of a hack writer, so I'm curious about it. When you kind of committed to motorcycling like that in 2011, did your approach to writing the travel stories change at all from previous when you weren't dedicated to motorcycling?
Not necessarily. I wear 2 hats. I wear 3 hats these days because I guide tours also. So as a writer, I am a travel writer and a photographer. I'm actually a National Geographic assignment photographer.
Yeah, you're a fantastic photographer.
Thank you. But also I'm a motor journalist and photographer. And so I bring to my writing about motorcycling my experience purely as a travel writer, the descriptive phraseology of showing, not telling, of trying to create in somebody's mindset the actual being in a destination. That's the essence of good travel writing.
Absolutely.
To put them into place, not just tell them what it's like. In fact, in a sense, to put them on the saddle of the bike.
Right.
Come with me. We'll make a journey together. And so that experience of 30-odd years as a full-time travel writer, I brought to motorcycling. And that's what I really enjoy. It's that descriptive process of sharing an experience.
Yeah, that absolutely makes sense. Thanks for getting a little bit into the craft there. So I want to jump back a little bit because you mentioned that when you were under the Obama administration, the rules about Americans going to Cuba changed, so you were able to start leading tours. But you went to Cuba before that, when travel to Cuba for American citizens. Are you an American citizen?
I am.
American citizens was a lot more difficult, a lot more restricted. How did you put that first trip together back in the 90s?
Well, firstly, I'm a journalist, and there was always a category for journalists to legally travel to Cuba. When I first started out, you actually had to apply to the Treasury Department. They could say yes or no.
The Treasury Department?
The Treasury Department. Why? Because it comes under the Trading with the Enemy.
Okay, gotcha.
It's the Trading with the Enemy Act, so that's jurisdiction of Treasury. So I went legally as a journalist and went backwards and forwards so often. When Obama made his change in 2011, the day before the change, all those restrictions were still in place, had been in place for a long, long time. And there was no category that permitted any U.S. citizen to travel to Cuba. Okay. The key change was that Obama created what was called a people-to-people license.
Right.
It was cultural. It was for groups only back then.
Okay.
And the license was to groups, to tour entities, if you will. You couldn't call them tours. And that's what we did. And it's interesting because when I initially applied for a license for the Treasury to run motorcycle tours, they denied it. And they said recreation is not permitted. Tourism is not permitted.
Gotcha.
So I reviewed the legislation. I went back to them and said, we're not recreating, we're not tourists, we're using the motorcycle as if it was a bus to get between the cultural encounters with Cubans. They granted the license.
So you had to kind of play the paperwork game.
Yeah, exactly. That's what it is.
All that kind of stuff is important. Perceptions are important. Have you been to Cuba since the administration changed from Obama to Trump?
Many times.
So has anything changed in that respect between the previous administration and this one?
Significantly, in one regard. The biggest change is the public mentality of the ability to travel. So what Trump did was half close the door. Individuals can still travel to Cuba under a license that's called Support for the Cuban People, which essentially means you can't have anything to do with governmental entities.
Sure.
But the people-to-people category still applies. You can still go and join my Cuban motorcycling tours if you wish, and do that legally. But the public perception has changed because the door was half closed by Trump last year. The perception was that he closed the door.
Right.
And then there was a second problem, is that there was this accusation of sonic attacks. There's no such thing as attacks. The FBI has sent 4 teams down there. They spent their special tech investigative teams, and they have reported no such thing as attacks. We don't know what happened to 22 people, diplomats who claim to have these medical issues. But that got a lot of news play. That's kind of the sexy headline, sonic attacks. And so people were left with the impression of men in black with big weird instruments on the streets of Cuba. It's just absurd, it's insane, doesn't exist, but it scared people away.
Sure.
So it's a more challenging environment right now to sell Cuba, even though Cuba is a safe, wonderful destination. And actually at the International Tourism Fair last November, won the safest country in the world award.
So if somebody from the United States or anywhere else in the world wanted to travel to Cuba, it's like I only speak English. I'm kind of a typical American in that fashion. I used to speak a little bit of French and used to speak a little bit of German, but I've lost it because you don't use it. But as an English speaker, an English-only speaker, how difficult or easy is it going to be for me to get around Cuba and communicate?
Okay, so we're talking about if you're going on your own.
Yes, if I go on my own without a guide.
Very, very easy. I mean, English is compulsory in schools in Cuba. All young kids speak Cuban, and those recent graduates, many of them speak very, very good English, as well as other languages. Cuba is number one in the Western Hemisphere for linguistic ability. So any graduates, they've usually got one or two languages behind them. In the boondocks of, in the countryside,
sure, it's going to be different.
Yeah, the older people don't speak English necessarily, but big deal. Yeah. We all communicate as human beings, right?
Yeah, that's one of the things that I've noticed in talking to people that have traveled to a lot of different places is that, if you come across somebody that speaks English, great, but if you don't, you still can communicate.
Sure.
Everybody's got to eat, everybody's got to sleep,
sure.
Everybody's got to go to the bathroom.
Sure.
There's ways to get around that. So, and of course, everybody always kind of says if you can learn a little bit of the local language, that's going to go a long way because it shows a good effort, so.
And very respectful.
Exactly, respectful. Learn how to address people, how to ask a question, please and thank you. Those are kind of the basics that are pretty easy to pick up in just about any language, at least in my experience. You gotta know how to order a beer. You don't want to go to a foreign country and not know how to get a beer.
Oh, that's number one. Right?
Number one. So how does, for anybody traveling to Cuba, how does money exchange work? Because I know going to Canada, going to Europe, you show up with a handful of dollars and, there's a money changer.
Well, okay, that's a great question because there are a couple of curiosities about Cuba. The first is it's got a dual monetary system.
Okay.
The second is that internationally, neither currency serves for anything. It's something you pin on the wall. You can't get Cuban currency outside Cuba, nor use them. But when you're in Cuba, there are two currencies. Cubans are paid in Cuban pesos.
Okay.
Their average state salary right now is $37 a month, but most Cubans have a secondary income source that's significantly more, and zero costs. Pretty well zero costs in their life. But most items of any value, and certainly anything that a foreign visitor is going to use to spend on a hotel or whatever, is a second currency called a convertible peso.
Okay.
All right, and they trade at 24 to 1. And there are banks and exchange bureaus who just change your dollars or your euros, and you get the convertible peso and operate just like anywhere else. They have credit cards in Cuba, but U.S. issued and processed credit cards, because of U.S. laws, cannot be used.
Okay. Yet. Maybe the laws will change someday.
Well, Obama actually permitted it to happen, but the bureaucracy never kind of caught up with that.
Well, they say that the only things you can rely on are death and taxes, and I always add bureaucracy to that because
that's
everywhere
right.
you go, there's this rule, that rule that you got to follow to get through, paperwork everywhere. So let's talk a little bit about your first trip to Cuba and what you were. Now, you're working on a book, so you did have that goal, but once you got there, how did you approach creating that book from the back of a motorcycle?
Okay, so this fortunately was not the first guidebook that I'd researched, so I knew the process. It's intense research going in. Now, to get the motorcycle to Cuba took 2 years from the beginning, the inception, to, because I was trying to work with the government to get permission. Sure. I met with Fidel, actually, and finally I'll show a photo this afternoon when I give the show of the Minister of Tourism signing off on my papers, you can bring the motorcycle. In the end, I closed the door on them, and I just came in illegally with the bike on a boat illegally from Florida. That was like, sorry.
That's okay.
Enough of this business.
I can bleep it.
I'm going. But anyway, to answer your question there, I had enough background knowledge already in the works. You need to know the geography, the history, etc. of your destination. That goes in the guidebook, and it begins to build the mental framework of the destination you're going to. Plus, I'd been going in and out many times. I've been
Without a motorcycle.
two dozen times or so by the time I arrived with the motorcycle. And of course, the key is how long are you going to need? How far can you go during the day? And what do you have to accomplish every day? So writing a guidebook, you have to check out restaurants, hotels, junctions, where hospitals are, all the pragmatic practicalities. It's not just a matter of, is it nice scenery and is there a lake here and
what's the weather
a
like?
beach there?
Yeah.
A guidebook is pretty intensive work. And so I factored how long I needed. Now, the other problem was that they only gave you, back then, could only get a 60-day total period. And it was funny, when my 60 days was up and I had to leave, how do I leave Cuba? There's no sea or air traffic to the States back then in 96.
Right.
And I arrived and I asked for another 30 days. And customs, because I had to go back to the marina where I'd arrived on a boat, they denied me. They said, you've got to leave. I said, I'm not leaving without the bike. You've got to leave. I said, I'm looking for a boat. I'll leave when I've got a boat. You've got to leave. I turned around. I went to the transit police that every 30 days gave me a stamp. I went to the transit police. They gave me 30 days. I went back to customs and said, look, the transit police gave me another 30 days. I'm not leaving. I'm looking for a boat. So I got another 30 days, no
there
more.
You go.
So I had to do it all that research, the core research, in two months, the entire country.
Yeah.
It's about the size of California, a little narrower, but it's 800 miles.
So it's a pretty big.
It's a big
country,
island.
Big island.
Yeah, and so
the only thing I know is it's 90 miles from the United States. I don't actually have any concept of how big.
It's long. So I put 7,000 miles in Cuba on the bike. Yeah.
Is there? What are the roads like?
Most of the roads, and certainly the roads we use on the tours, are in pretty good condition. There are potholes,
Sure,
but
like any other road.
Relatively little traffic, and Cubans honor all the regulations. You don't find anybody running red lights, etc. But the roads are in pretty good condition. There are a couple of areas, certainly not on our tours, that are mountainous, and we have you have off-roading, not serious off-roading, but unpaved conditions. But certainly the tours that we offer, I say we, I'm talking about Edelweiss bike travel, are on asphalt roads, and they're good for the most part.
So one of the things that I've always been fascinated about with Cuba is, because trade with the United States was cut off for so many years, you see every country has their car guys, their motorcycle guys, that culture. And so, the pictures I've seen of Cuban car culture, motorcycle culture, it's all stuff that was made in the 40s and 50s or earlier, and it's just been, maintained and babied and modified and compromised and updated. Have you seen that kind of cultural aspect in that, motorhead culture change from the 90s to more recently?
You're going to be surprised by what I tell you. 1 in 5 cars in Cuba is pre-revolution.
Okay.
So I did a coffee table book on this. As you know, I'm working with Starsky of Starsky & Hutch, David Soul. We are renovating Hemingway's old Chrysler together in Cuba right now. And so the old cars, the presence of these old cars, an integral part of why you go to Cuba. It's part of the ambience that is purely Cuban, and it's a fascination. But what will surprise you is the cars are getting better and better every year. Why? Because until Obama's changes in 2011 and 13, no car parts could be sent from the USA.
Right.
So David Soul, who's now British living in London, the Treasury Department attempted to fine him for us sending parts to Cuba to restore Hemingway's 1955 Chrysler.
Okay.
That changed. So now real car parts, real paints can come to Cuba. And so the cars are looking better and better because also changes within Cuba that Raul Castro made have led to a vast increase in the amount of private entrepreneurship. So there's a lot more money in the system.
Gotcha.
Tied to all the Americans coming in. Last year, 617,000 Americans went to Cuba.
No kidding. That's a big number.
And they're spending money. So the Cubans have got money. And they're bringing on all these parts and paints. And the cars never looked so good as they do now.
So, and that extends to motorcycles, I hope.
And the motorcycles, and of course they're an integral part of what I like to introduce people to in Cuba. So the people-to-people programs that we offer, you have to have, under US law, your encounters with Cubans, the kind of formal encounters. It doesn't mean sit-down lectures.
Right.
What do you want to do? Hey, let's get together with my pal Alex, who pitched against the Baltimore Orioles for the Cuban national team.
There you go.
Let's learn about baseball in Cuba. Check it off, people to people. How about the old Harley guys? Let's get together with my pal Luis and his 13 old pre-revolutionary Harleys, or my friend Ling Chang, who has got more money than me and has been buying up all the Indians in Cuba that he can find to restore and whatnot.
Oh, good.
Right?
I'm glad to hear
Or
that.
Che Guevara's son, my close friend Ernesto. It is 48 Harley Panhead and a brand new fleet of Harleys.
So basically, they're just like us when it comes to motorcycles.
But the whole scene is so different. In my show this afternoon at 2:15, I've got a photograph of the only BMW I ever saw in Cuba when I rode around in 1996. And of course, the owner, I don't know the year, the owner said, oh, it's Adolf Hitler's year. Right. So, but anyway, you'll see that it's all been repaired by whatever means were possible.
Sure. So for people like me who dream of going to Cuba someday, and other people who maybe have never thought about it, what's the core appeal? Like, what am I trying to? What's the underlying thing about Cuba that makes it so special that it's become this kind of fabled destination?
Okay, that's a great question. Well, the first is, of course, that it was off limits to the Americans for decades. The second is that it tried an experiment, socio-political economic experiment, that was unique in the Western Hemisphere. Now, we associate communism with failed economies and repression. Certainly, they did a pretty good job of wrecking their economy, assisted by the embargo, which, by the way, is designed to prevent other countries trading with Cuba also.
Sure.
But they have had a great success in many, many ways. Culturally, probably the most vitalic country in the Western Hemisphere, bar none. Educated, number one. No illiteracy, right?
None.
They eradicated illiteracy in 1961. Sent 110,000 teachers and students to every part of the country and said, you don't come back home till the people you're billeted with can read and write. So you have a tremendously educated society. It's got a unique context. The 1950s context of the hot point and singer signs on the Havana billboards that were never taken down. All right, and one of my artist friends is now revising all the neon there.
Oh, really?
So he's just created a neon school in Havana. I'll take you to it. Right? You see people learning how to recreate neon. So Havana's coming back to life. And virtually nothing was pulled down and replaced. So you have this time warp aspect with all the old cars, the old Harley Davidsons. But you have a culture. This is the most important thing. It's about people. Wherever you go, it's about people. The Cuban people are just fantastic. They love Americans for a start, but they are also supremely self-confident. They know what the revolution has given them. They appreciate that. Those who don't want to leave and want more freedoms, because there are freedom restrictions, no doubt about it. And everybody that I take to Cuba, virtually without exception, I lead tours for National Geographic. Educated people who've been around the world, they come back and they say, that was the most rewarding week of travel I can remember in my life. I want to come back. I hear that over and over again.
So what can is it easier, that might be a loaded word, to go on a package tour or to just take off to Cuba by yourself for an American?
Well, since we're talking about motorcyclists, it's virtually impossible to do it's not impossible to do a motorcycle on your own. It's very difficult. Firstly, it's illegal under US law, but if you turn your back to that fact, there's really only one route, a twice-a-year boat to get a bike to Cuba. And we all know people who've done it. But legally, the only way to do motorcycle Cuba is on a people-to-people tour. There's no motorcycle rentals in Cuba.
Okay.
All right? They've actually just bought the little three-wheel Italian 300cc jobs to rent.
Yeah.
But other than that, you're going to have to do a people-to-people experience.
So how Edelweiss does one, or do they do it more than once a year?
Oh, yeah. We have 2 programs, an 8-day and an 11-day program in Cuba. We have about 10 or 12 departures, plus one that you need to know the webpage. I'm doing a ladies' first tour with my friend Carla King, motor journalist also, leading that together through Edelweiss. And the web page has the designated dates that are U.S. compliant. So they are designed to be compliant with U.S. legislation.
So what would an American going on one of these tours need to know ahead of time? What's gonna help somebody from the U.S. make the most of a trip to Cuba?
Open mind. Cuba is so much not what you anticipate and so much more than you anticipate. And because of the 5-6 decades of antagonistic relationship, which means both sides have tried to profile the other in the worst light, a lot of people who dismiss Cuba because, why would I go to this repressive communist state? Well, it's not that way. It's just not that way.
Yeah.
You get on a billboard box in downtown Havana and denounce Raul, there are going to be consequences. But it's, you're not got police on the streets, as I once did a TV interview with a former head of USAID saying, the brutal Cuban police are there ready to beat people around the head with batons. Like, this is just insane propagandist nonsense. It's a rich, vital, happy society where the kids can walk and play on the streets safely at night, and they're like any other community. They have the same values that we do. They've got a different political system, and it's just a fabulous destination.
Well, that's good to hear. This is going to sound like a really pedestrian question after all of that kind of stuff, but what's the food like? My only experience with Cuban food is Americanized Cuban food in southern Florida.
Joe, don't judge it by that. Had you read, if you have read my book, Mi Moto Fidel?
This is a good opportunity to plug your book.
Okay, so National Geographic published my book, Mi Moto Fidel, Motorcycling Through Castro's Cuba, which I stupidly forgot to bring with me. But you can go to my website, ChristopherPBaker.com, and see the page on the book. Still available through me. But anyway, in that, because I journeyed in 1996, these were tough years for Cuba.
Yeah.
The Soviet Union had collapsed. They had no diesel, no gasoline. The tractors weren't running. The trains weren't running. Agriculture died on the vine, literally. Tough years. And the dining scene was awful. Raul comes along, liberalizes, privatizes restaurants, and all this money coming in from Americans and other tourists, 4.5 million tourists to Cuba last year, is being invested in the private businesses. We stay with private bed and breakfasts on the motorcycle tours, not exclusively, but during the trips.
During the trip, yeah.
That money gets turned into private restaurants. There are some world-class dining opportunities now in Cuba with excellent cuisine and amazing venues. Amazing venues, buildings you don't want to step into because they look like they're going to collapse. 19, centenary buildings, and you go in there and you go up the stairs with these murals and marble statues that are crumbling apart, and you'd think, oh my God, I've just entered the top New York bistro in town. It's amazing.
So what are some typical ingredients that Cubans cook with?
Okay,
like,
well,
is it a big beef country, or is it a big
no, it's not a big.
country?
It's big chicken. It's big pork country. Yeah, you can find beef, lobster. How about a whole lobster
Right,
for
they are an
$10? Fresh out of the bay. Ropa Vieja, talking of beef, that I like it with lamb. They're big on lamb. Ropa Vieja is string beef marinated, prepared with seasonings and green peppers, rice and beans, always rice and beans, and fried plantains. Yeah.
So it sounds like, if you're used to anything that comes from, the southern United States, Mexico, the Caribbean, you're going to find something in Cuba.
Yeah, but you're not going to find spicy food.
So not
Cubans,
spicy, though.
no,
Okay.
not spicy at all. They don't like spicy. Seasoned is different.
Yeah,
Highly seasoned, but not spicy.
All right. Well, Chris, listen, thanks for coming on the show, and I appreciate all your insights into Cuba. I'm now more excited about trying to get there than I have been before, and I really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Great. Well, last plug, 2:15 this afternoon. I've got
That's right.
a Cuba presentation in the Walnut Room, and then we have the booth here for Edelweiss Bag Travel.
All right.
Wes, thank you very much.
Yeah, no problem.
Chasing the Horizon is brought to you in Season 2 by Dunlop Motorcycle Tires. Motorcyclists the world over recognize the name Dunlop, and for good reason. With extensive global resources and a commitment to racing disciplines worldwide, Dunlop draws on a vast body of knowledge to develop innovative motorcycle tire technology. Much of this technology quickly makes its way to motorcycle riders, whether they ride on the track, street, or a weekend off-road adventure. Dunlop maintains extensive development and manufacturing capabilities in the U.S., focused on developing groundbreaking new products. Dunlop has been building tires using domestic and foreign materials in Buffalo, New York since 1920, and to this day is the largest manufacturer building motorcycle tires in the USA. Point your web browser to dunlopmotorcycletires.com to learn more about Dunlop's promotions, find the right tires for your bike, and use a searchable index of hundreds of Dunlop motorcycle tire dealers across North America. Please take some time to engage with us on the internet. Chasing the Horizon is on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and of course you can visit the website at chasingthehorizon.us for show notes and links for all the sponsors, news items, and guests. There's a mailing list with exclusive content and giveaways open only to subscribers. You can sign up at tinyletter.com/chasingthehorizon. Thank you for coming back for the 33rd episode of Chasing the Horizon. Episode 34 will feature a discussion with Indian Scout Bobber Build-Off winner Fred Juarez, and that'll be out on October 15th. Thanks for listening. We'll see you out there somewhere on the road. Or off it. Ride safe.